There's a version of self-awareness that gets talked about constantly. Journaling, therapy, knowing your attachment style, being able to name your emotions before they name you. That version gets posted about. It gets podcasted. It fills bookshelves. But there's another version, quieter, less visible, and almost never discussed. Because the most self-aware people in any room aren't usually the ones talking loudest about their growth. They're the ones who've noticed something uncomfortable, that the language we use to describe ourselves is often the biggest barrier to actually knowing ourselves. There are 7 things highly self-aware people almost never say out loud, and the reasons why reveal more about the psychology of self-knowledge than most books on the subject will. Let's start with the one that sounds the most harmless. I already know that. Think about the last time someone offered you a perspective you'd technically heard before. Maybe a friend brought up something about your patterns. Maybe a book said something you'd read elsewhere. Maybe a podcast connected 2 dots you thought you'd already connected. And somewhere in you, something closed.
Not defensively, quietly. An internal filing of the information under received, and a gentle moving on. This is one of the most common traps in personal development. The difference between having heard something and having actually integrated it is enormous, but they feel almost identical from the inside. Highly self-aware people have learned to treat "I already know that" as a signal to pay closer attention, not less. Because the fact that something is familiar doesn't mean you've finished with it. Often, it means the opposite. The most dangerous knowledge is the kind you feel like you already have. I'm just being honest. Honesty is one of the most misused concepts in human relationships. The phrase, "I'm just being honest," almost always announces something that isn't actually about honesty. It's about delivery, about the speaker's comfort with bluntness, about the satisfaction of saying the difficult thing without taking responsibility for how it lands. Highly self-aware people have noticed this distinction. There is a difference between truth and the delivery of truth. And using "I'm just being honest" as a shield removes the speaker from any accountability for impact. Real honesty, the kind that comes from genuine self-awareness, asks a harder question. Is this true? And is this kind? And is this necessary? And is this the right moment? When someone truly understands themselves, they know that unfiltered expression is often less about the other person and more about the relief of saying the thing. Self-awareness means being honest about that too. I don't care what people think. This one is almost never true, and highly self-aware people know it. The human brain runs social comparison software continuously. Caring what people think is not a weakness. It's a feature of your nervous system that evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. Completely eliminating that response isn't enlightenment. It's detachment. What self-aware people have developed isn't a lack of caring. It's a more precise filter for whose opinion counts, in what context, and for what reason. They've built a hierarchy of feedback. Certain people's perspectives on certain things matter deeply, and the rest carries less weight.
The phrase, "I don't care what people think," usually signals the opposite. Someone who genuinely doesn't care doesn't need to announce it. The announcement is itself a performance. For an audience, they're insisting they've already stopped caring about. I'm not like other people. The desire to be unique is universal, which is itself the problem. Every person who believes they see things more clearly than the people around them, who feels that their experience is more genuine or more complex or more considered, is operating on the same belief as everyone else who has ever felt that way. The belief is not unique. It is, statistically, one of the most common beliefs humans hold. Highly self-aware people have confronted this, not to strip themselves of individuality, but to understand the difference between genuine difference and the ego's need to position itself as exceptional. There is a version of self-awareness that becomes its own vanity. The person who has done enough inner work to know about cognitive biases, but then exempts themselves from having any. True self-awareness comes with a specific kind of humility. The recognition that you are probably not the exception to most of the rules you think you're exempt from. That's just who I am. Self-knowledge is supposed to be a tool for growth, not a ceiling you install above yourself. That's just who I am is often the end of a conversation that should keep going. It presents identity as a fixed object, something you've discovered and are now simply reporting. But identity is a process. It shifts with experience, with environment, with time. Highly self-aware people use self-knowledge differently. Instead of, "That's just who I am," the more honest version sounds like, "That's a pattern I notice in myself, and I'm still figuring out when it serves me and when it doesn't." That is a sentence almost nobody says out loud, because it requires holding your own identity with a looser grip than most people are comfortable with. The people who are most honest about who they are tend to be most reluctant to define it finally. "I've done the work." This phrase has become the currency of self-development culture, and highly self-aware people are deeply suspicious of it. Not because doing inner work isn't real or valuable, but because "I've done the work" tends to function as a termination point. It signals completion, a finished project, a box ticked.
Growth doesn't work that way. The self is not a renovation you complete. and then live in. It's more like a relationship, one that requires ongoing attention, that changes as you change, and that occasionally requires you to revisit rooms you thought you'd already dealt with. The most developed people you'll ever meet rarely describe themselves as done. They might describe themselves as more equipped, more practiced, less reactive than they used to be. But done? Almost never. Because the deeper you go, the more clearly you see how much further there is. Everything happens for a reason. This one requires the most care, because for many people, it carries genuine comfort. And comfort matters. But highly self-aware people have noticed a specific way this phrase gets used that has nothing to do with comfort. It gets used to close off difficulty,
To skip the processing of something hard by installing a prefabricated meaning over it. The experience becomes a chapter in a predetermined story, rather than something that actually needs to be sat with. Psychologists call this spiritual bypassing, using a framework of meaning to avoid feeling the actual weight of an experience. Real self-awareness requires tolerating difficulty without immediately converting it into a lesson. Sometimes something just hurt. Sometimes a loss is a loss. Sometimes the reason isn't visible yet. And sitting in that discomfort without resolving it prematurely is the actual work. The most self-aware people in the room are often the ones most willing to say, "I don't know what this means yet," and mean it. So what's the common thread between all seven?
Every one of them is a way of closing a loop that should stay open, of arriving at a conclusion that removes the discomfort of continued uncertainty. Self-awareness, at its deepest level, is not a destination. It's a practice of staying uncomfortable enough to keep learning. It's the willingness to hold your own identity, your own opinions, your own understanding of yourself, with just enough looseness that new information can still get in. The most self-aware people you'll ever meet are not the ones with the most polished answers about who they are. They're the ones most practiced at asking better questions, and most willing to live inside those questions without rushing to resolution. That's not a comfortable place to be, but it's where the actual work happens.
That's where I'll leave it for now. If this got you thinking, the comments are open. I read them. Subscribe for more. See you next time.